The Tempest is believed to be Shakespeare's last solo-written play and resultantly has been established as a staple in theatre and the world of literature. The unexpectedly optimistic depiction of the human conditions of ambition and motivation captured the essence of Shakespeare's ability to captivate audiences for 4 centuries, telling universal stories through enticing fantastical situations. As a result of this, there has been an extensive response to the play, with it being taught in schools all around the world for its contemporary significance and its skillful exploration of themes in a way that exemplifies the ability of language devices and techniques to shape meaning. In addition to becoming part of the Western canon, The Tempest has invoked modern authors to reinterpret and reimagine the core of the play. Margaret Atwood's novel Hag-Seed is the most notable of these responses, effectively appropriating the meaning and primary themes of the play into a contemporary setting. Hag-Seed is a modern interpretation of the fundamental themes that made Shakespeare's play so well loved. In Module A, Textual Conversations, it is our responsibility as students to understand what makes the relationship between these two interconnected texts so unique, and what that says about the broader world of art. Today's presentation explores the intertextual relationship between the core themes of Shakespeare's play, The Tempest, and Margaret Atwood's novel, Hag-Seed, evaluating with direct reference the resonances and dissonances of the two texts, and analysing the ways in which Atwood's text reflects and rejects the core ideas of The Tempest. The Tempest and Hag-Seed are both manifestations of authorial context. Context plays an extremely significant role in the justification and manifestation of themes, ideas, and concepts that are explored throughout both texts. The resonances and dissonances that arise when analysing how context influences the way that composers formulate and explore ideas, and provides a fascinating point of study and comparison between the two texts. There are similarities and differences in the way that context influences each text respectively. Now, the first of these distinct dissonances between the texts is actually the socio-cultural context in which the authors formulated their ideas and values reflected in their texts. To understand the intertextuality of the two pieces and further extend our comprehension of how authorial context shapes the way that texts form meaning, we must first analyse the conditions in which the texts were composed. William Shakespeare was born in 1564 in Stratford-upon-Avon, England, at a time where colonial and humanist movements were on the rise. As a result of this, we get a representation of Shakespeare's perspective on colonialism through the treatment of the character Caliban. Humanism, which essentially suggested that humans were inherently good and always had the ability to realise this moral potential, is infused into the text through the way the playwright diverges from his well-known tragic formula into a romantic comedy. Contrary to this, Hag-Seed was written by Margaret Atwood in 2016. A Canadian woman in a modern world where society is largely secular and women are valued as more than products of men, Hag-Seed is an appropriation of the meaning of Shakespeare's play, but a distinct diversion from the representation of the original piece's context. In this sense, the texts are actually extremely different, both exploring themes and concepts in reference to different societal values and ideas. Context is the greatest dissonance of this textual conversation, with the texts being written 4 centuries apart. However, the respective contexts also provide a vital resonance in Atwood's contemporization of Shakespeare's theme of colonialism, providing an appropriated version of the same core ideas, and even commenting on the effect that these had on present society. Through its illustration of a powerful European who takes control of an island and subjugates its inhabitants, The Tempest reflects the fantastic and often fabricated tales of unfamiliar places and people that were filtering into British society, as well as the nervousness about England's new role and different views on the morality of colonialism. Prospero states that, "Two of these fellows you must know and own, this thing of darkness I acknowledge mine," and in doing so establishes the colonialist perspective as a function of shifting societal values within Shakespeare's context. In this statement, Shakespeare effectively establishes the colonialist perspective through his selection of words such as own and mine, conveying his power over the prior inhabitants of the island. In addition to this, the composer has successfully dehumanized the subject of the statement through dismissive language in thing, and the relation of Caliban to darkness expresses Prospero's extremely low opinion of the creature. In this, the language forms and features of Shakespeare's text expresses socio-political values within the literary world as a reflection of his authorial context. Furthering the idea of the protagonist as a colonizer, Prospero comes to Sycorax's island, overcomes her, takes control of the land, and forces his own culture onto the people. Through this perspective, Prospero was seen as putting Caliban under slavery and condemning him a monster, and we can interpret Prospero as a representative of the Europeans who usurped the land of Native Americans and Australian Aboriginals and enslaved them. He, as a sign of superiority, takes Caliban as half-man, and pushing the native to the side, places himself at the helm of affairs. He displaces Caliban's mother and treats her as an animal, and has full control over everything on the island. Caliban is dehumanized and treated as subhuman. He is described as deformed, evil, smiling, treacherous, drunkard, violent, savage, and devil-worshipping. This goes on. According to Prospero, he is not even a human, rather a born devil, and Caliban is seen as a despicable entity, and is the manifestation of white condescension towards people of another colour, broadening Shakespeare's idea that some are born to dominate, while others are born to be dominated. Prospero the colonizer, in turn, uses words like light, knowledge, and wisdom to refer to himself, while using the terms that we talked about, like darkness, ignorance, and elemental, to describe the colonized. In this sense, the use of language enlightens the reader as to Prospero's values regarding his indentured servants. In response to this coarse theme of colonialism, Atwood sets Hag-Seed in a modern prison, establishing a link between the mass incarceration that prevails in North America today, disproportionately targeting minority communities and the colonialist regimes that have oppressed those minorities for centuries. She thus uses Shakespeare's work to explore the consequences of the worldwide phenomenon, whose beginning Shakespeare himself witnessed, and in doing so firmly establishes a key resonance between the texts, that they both explore the theme of colonization. Atwood reimagined The Tempest in a way that suits contemporary audiences, while still mirroring the details portrayed in the original play. Another of the core similarities between The Tempest and Hag-Seed is that, in a sense, they are both representations of shifting values, and are influenced heavily by other texts, contexts, and values outside of the direct textual conversation. Intertextuality can be defined as the relationship between texts that help to shape a text's meaning, or the echoes of other texts within a text. Therefore, not only is there a direct conversation between these two texts, but there is a link to many more outside this, and the idea of intertextuality explores this relationship. It's been argued by many postmodern literary theorists that all composers are heavily influenced by other texts, contexts, and values, and that there is essentially no text that exists independently of the world of the creator, that every text is simply a response to a constantly evolving and ongoing conversation that composers aim to contribute to. Just as Atwood's novel Hag-Seed responds and is influenced by Shakespeare's play, The Tempest was significantly influenced by other texts of Shakespeare's time, drawing meaning and value through the representation of these other texts and perspectives. There are a host of examples detailing the derivation of Shakespeare's play. The first of which is that The Tempest was actually derived from a reading of a letter written by William Strachey, a soldier describing the experiences of a shipwreck survivor. On the 24th of July 1609, a fleet of 9 English vessels were nearing the end of a supply voyage to the Bermudas when it ran into a cruel tempest, leaving them stranded on an island. The Tempest contains only one direct reference to the Bermudas, when Ariel tells how Prospero called him to fetch stew from the still vexed Bermuths. Yet many critics see Strachey's account of the wreck in the Bermudas as a key source for the play. Aside from the Tempest title, the violent storm and the island setting, Shakespeare may have been inspired by Strachey's vivid descriptions of conspiracy and diverse mutinies in the Bermudas and in Jamestown. In addition to this, Gonzalo's infamous Commonwealth monologue reflects Montaigne's essay of the Cannibals, of which Caliban's name could even pass as an anagram for. Gonzalo, the gentle and well-meaning though naive counsellor, imagines an ideal society before his mocking comrades, and when we compare these words with Montaigne's rhapsodic praise of savagery, a form of society he alleges is actually found among the people of the New World, we see that Gonzalo's speech depicting his idea of a utopia is actually formed directly from Montaigne's illustration of American Indian societies. Therefore, at one level we find the play an association between savagery and utopia, and by envisaging how he would rule the island, Gonzalo depicts his version of paradise that rejects the usual foibles of a civilized society, such as labour and commerce, mirroring the kind of society that Montaigne championed in his essay and illustrating the intertextuality of Shakespeare's famous play. Furthermore, Prospero's final speech is almost a replica of a speech given by Medea in Ovid's poem Metamorphoses. The characters of Stefano and Trinculo have a distinct resemblance to the Commedia dell'arte stock characters, Arcolino and Brighella, while Prospero and Miranda mirror Pantalone and his daughter Isabella. The Italian theatrical form was extremely popular at the time of the Tempest production. We have for you now a preserved extract of conversation between Shakespeare and Atwood that was allowed by this year's invention of the time machine. We'll play this for you now.
What do you have to say now about colonialism and the motif of imprisonment that you embedded within it?
You need to understand that here in my time, the values and ideas of colonialism that I explored are completely normal, and I'm unsure of how I feel about them, but that doesn't mean that they don't exist. Today, I live in a world where the colonizer has the power, and in writing my text, I wish to convey the idea of imprisonment, particularly within one's previously owned land. I used Caliban to explore this theme of imprisonment.
I understand full well the ideas and values of your society, and I have in turn attempted to appropriate the theme of imprisonment as a result of colonialism into a more direct, literal form of incarceration. What say you on this?
I think the way that you have constructed your text has been extremely effective in acknowledging and appropriating my idea of imprisonment. I believe that the way you literalized my motif lent it a distinct credibility and allowed you to further explore the concept, even going so far as to comment on the global effects of colonialism that I myself have witnessed.
Now, what would you say were the most important pieces of work from within your context that had an impact on your play? And how did you use these to explore your motif of imprisonment? I know that I used your themes of colonialism to craft my piece, and I would very much like to hear what in turn influenced you.
Although I'd very much like to argue to you that my text is entirely original and completely mine, I don't really believe this, and neither do you. Whilst the way that I was able to formulate my ideas, expressing both my current context and the values embedded within my society, was mine and mine alone, the key concepts and values were not. Perhaps the greatest spark in my creational journey for the play was my reading of William Strachey's account of the tempest that drowned his capsule. It created in my mind a glorious image of a storm that I wished to instantly write down.
But is there anything beyond this, beyond just images? What about the way that Gonzalo's speech deals with utopia? Or Caliban's name being an anagram for Montaigne's essay as well as the ideas explored within? You haven't really answered my question at all, William.
Margaret, you are doing a fine job of discrediting my ideas here, and I can't help but feel like I must most feebly defend the fact that I wrote this text, not anyone else. However, you have a strong point in that I absolutely borrowed from ideas that have struck me from the past. I mean, where else do we get inspiration from? Everything we write is a construct of the way that we perceive society and the lives that we have lived. A blind man will write with different words to one with full sight, even though they describe the same scene. We can't conjure images, ideas, and thoughts from a room with nothing in it. We need to look externally. What I'm getting at is that we all have experiences in our lives that shape the way that we think and therefore the themes that we explore when we think creatively. For me, my experience and values, including standout texts and images, have been infused almost subconsciously into my play.
What this conversation really shows us is the validity of the theory that all texts have some form of conversation outside of the world of the author. In the end, what one should be able to gain from these insights into the impacts of the play is that, just as Atwood was responding to a story created by a playwright 4 centuries ago, Shakespeare wrote The Tempest in response to the world of literature and art that surrounded him. This exploration of the intertextuality that exists within Shakespeare's play proves that Atwood and Shakespeare are indeed very similar, and that they both derived their texts from others. This concept goes even further, exploring the ways that texts influence each other, drawing on other texts, contexts, and values to shape meaning. The intertextual relationship between the two goes further than a simple conversation, and as a result of this we get a much richer reading experience which welcomes new interpretations as it brings its own context, idea, and story into the text at hand. As layer upon layer of meaning is introduced, there is a pleasure in the sense of connection and the continuity of texts and cultures. Intertextuality, therefore, invites us to revisit the earlier text, often with new insights into its meaning for our time. Although we've looked at a lot of core themes and ideas today, addressing the ways in which the two texts reflect and reject the same ideas, there is so much more that can be explored. The world of literature is so complex, and if we were to look deeper into the ways that texts influence each other, drawing on context to form meaning, we could easily get lost. The core idea of this presentation is that texts draw from each other. By comparing these two texts, we come to understand how composers are influenced by other texts, contexts, and values, and how this shapes meaning. By identifying, interpreting, analysing, and evaluating the textual features, conventions, contexts, and values of these two pieces, we can now see that the relationship between all literature and how these two texts are inextricably linked.